Alright, so you remember earlier this year when I did the legacy video with Mama, and she said that you watched it and actually liked it a lot.
Yeah.
And said that you would be willing to do something. So I want to do the same thing today with maybe slightly different questions, but basically the same theme. It's really important to me to know my history and where I come from and like where you came from and your experiences, because I've noticed that particularly in our family, but families in general, maybe it's just because of the day and age that we live in, they're not very good about hanging on to heritage and like family stories and that kind of thing. And I think that it's important to know that stuff, because if you don't, you can be doomed to repeat the same things over again that maybe you don't want to, or you lose something crucial and important that you could take with you to help you later in your own life. So I have some questions. We're just going to kind of start with the basics and kind of go from there. And I do want to say thank you for being willing to do this, because I know YouTube and everything else is more my generational thing than it is yours. It's really cool that you're willing to do this. So the first thing that I would like to know is, when and where were you born?
I was born in Lawrenceburg, Indiana in 1966.
And what's one of your fondest childhood memories?
So I have two, and these are probably the earliest ones I can remember. One of them is we had this big player piano, the kind where it's got like the paper reels or whatever, and you pump the thing. But you could also play it as a piano. And I remember sitting at that thing, I don't know how old I was, 4 maybe, and playing it and singing. And I don't know, it might have just been a lot of noise, but to me it was like the first time I thought, wow, I can make music. So that was cool. And then the second one, maybe the same age, a little older. My godparents lived in Akron, Ohio, and we went to visit them. And I remember running barefoot in their yard, and I felt like I was like 1,000 miles an hour. So it was like, wow, when you don't wear shoes, you can
You really run fast.
So yes, simple memories, but there you go.
What was it like growing up in Manchester, Indiana at that time? Because I know it's probably changed quite a bit to now.
It was really different. I mean, it was still more rural. I mean, it was a neighborhood, but I mean, we had cows right beside us. So it was more of like a country type thing. But I was the youngest by quite a bit, so I was by myself all the time. And I wasn't allowed to leave the yard until I was 10, so you know, a lot of it was using my imagination, and a lot of G.I. Joes, Little Green Army Men. That's pretty much what dominated my life. And tractors and whatnot.
My third question on here, but you kind of already brought it up, was when did you first start getting into music? And you mentioned that the piano. Did you ever take like any formal lessons? Because I know you play mostly by ear and out of instinct. You don't really read a whole lot of music. Did you ever do anything like that, or was it always just pure instinct?
So we always there was a guitar in every corner when I was growing up. And then we had the piano. Plus I had this, what are they called? I forget the name of these things, but it's a little organ, and you've got, I don't know, maybe 20 regular keys, black and white keys. But then over here you've got like these buttons for chords, and there's major and minor chords. So between those guitars and that little organ mainly, that's how I learned to play. And I would just listen to something and then kind of copy it, mimic it, or whatever. And that's really what I've done in music all my life, up to even now playing the organ at church. I'm basically just, I'm just basically a big faker. I just copy stuff and try to reproduce what I hear.
Everybody is. But
I tried taking lessons a couple of times, and I've tried to learn to read music a few times. And maybe I just don't have the patience, but it's like I don't have time for this. Because in my mind, I can just play the stupid thing without...
So what's the benefit of taking the time with the semantics?
Well, here's the problem with that. Like if I have a choir and I'm going to play to accompany the choir, it doesn't work. Because the chords that I'm playing don't go with what they're singing. And then also, especially, it doesn't matter in rock music, and nobody reads music, but like if I play at church, if there's other organists in the house who know how to read, they know I'm faking it, and that bugs me.
So before we talk any more about music, I do want to talk a little bit about the house that you grew up in, because it's so interesting to me, and I tell people the stories all the time, and it's just kind of one of those things where it's like, wow, that's crazy, because I have never experienced anything paranormal, really. Like, I've had some kind of cool things happen, but it's nothing like crazy. So tell me a little bit about that house.
Yeah, so the house was a little funky. It was an old house. This house had been built in the early to mid 1800s, and the walls were like, they were crazy thick because of the numerous courses of brick. So I think the walls were probably like a foot thick. But there was no air conditioning in this house. The heat was almost non-existent. That, coupled with the fact that my dad was, super tight, so we couldn't use the heat. And when we did, so then he put in this wood stove, a series of these wood stoves that he would buy at like flea markets and junk. I mean, you could literally see the fire through the steel, and it was a bad deal. But anyway, so the house was really old. And from the time I was really little, the main living room just creeped me out. I can remember running through there at night, and even during the day, and I just knew somebody was like right behind me, about to grab me. And so that was, but as I got older, it got more and more pronounced, And I can remember, really everybody, it was just common knowledge, the ghost. Oh, it was the ghost, or whatever. And then my sister, my oldest sister, your Aunt Diane, she was home from college, and she saw some lady in black, all black, and said that she thought that she looked like she had been burnt, or maybe she was like all charcoaled or something. So that was kind of creepy. And then my nephew, your cousin Brandon, he was little. He was probably 3 years old, and we were outside grilling, and your aunt sent him back in there for some reason to get something, and he came out white as a sheet and said that he wasn't going back in there because that mean lady was in there. And then, we had all kinds of things where doors would slam, and your grandmother, Granny, got locked in one of the bedrooms and couldn't get out, and that door would lock, so the door would slam shut, and the door would lock, and you couldn't open it. And so she got locked in there, and we had to rescue her, go out. Your Uncle Mark had to go out on the balcony and crawl through the window to get her out. But there was just all kind of weird things that happened. You would hear people come up and down the stairs when you were upstairs. I had a friend who spent the night when we were teenagers, and your grandma and grandpa were gone. They were off doing the flea market thing. So it was just him and me there. And we had been down, there was a pool hall down the road, and we had been at this pool hall, and he came back to the house, but I didn't. I stayed there for maybe, 2 more hours. When I finally got back, he said, "Man, why don't you quit running up and down the stairs? What, And I said, "Joe, I just got here." But he said that people were, sounded like somebody just kept running up and down the stairs, up and down the stairs. Well, later, we come to find out, after I was gone, everybody was gone, some people had bought the house from Grandma, and they were refinishing everything. And when they tried to refinish, when they took the flooring up in the living room, there was this big stain on the floor, and they would remove it, bleach it and everything, and it would just keep coming back. Well, come to find out, the history of the house, a woman had died of tuberculosis in the house, and she bled to death basically, and that's where she fell and died. So now the theory is that's who this. That's the theory.
And that's what I had always thought too.
But even still, when I go past that house, it creeps me out. And I almost bought it again when Mama and I got married. We tried to, after Grandpa died, we were going to buy the house from Grandma, and she wouldn't sell it to us.
Because of the...
Well, she just didn't think we were really, we were young, it wouldn't have been a good thing for us to do. So it's probably a good thing. The house it needed so much work.
And do you think, because one of the things that I had always been told too was that Aunt Diane and Aunt Susan messed around with a Ouija board in that front room. Was that like a consistent thing, or was that like a one-time thing? And
No,
do you think that contributed?
That Ouija board, so in that living room, there was this kind of these built-in cabinets, and we kept games in there, and that Ouija board was always in there, and I remember playing with the studio. You got this little deal, and everyone puts their fingers on it. Well, I played with that thing like it was a car on that board, and so it was always in the house. So
that's interesting.
Yeah.
I actually sent some of the stories into like paranormal podcast, and I couldn't go and like take pictures from the street. I would love to be able to do that, but I'm not obviously in Indiana. So I went on Google Earth, and I like went to Manchester, and I took screenshots of the house, and they actually came out really, really well. Like, it looks like I'm standing on the street, but the house is like, I mean, the trees are all overgrown. It is obviously a really old house. Yeah. And those stories are just so interesting to me. Moving on then, back to music and everything. Tell me about your first band.
So my first band was me and this guy named Jim Zieber. Bless his heart, man. He was, like, if you open up a dictionary to look up the word nerd, Jim's picture's in there. But it was just him and me, and his grandmother had this big old house. And like in the parlor, that's where we had the band. Mm-hmm. Well, that's where I learned to play like bar chords and rock music. He taught me that, because I didn't know any of that before. I just knew like whole chords. So it started there, and we didn't play very long, and these three guys from Rising Sun came, and I don't know if Jim had like put up an ad at the music store or what, that we were looking for a drummer and blah blah blah. So these guys came, and right away I guess they realized that I could sing. So they like stole me away. I didn't play guitar again after that for years, because I was just a singer at that point. And it was heavy metal music, like hair metal music. So, and this was back before metal was cool. Yeah, I did that for years, and anyway, it evolved from there. But that was the first band, was Jim Zieber and his grandma's parlor.
And you're still in a band with some of the people
that
you used to play with.
So one of those guys was Poe Withard, and he's still this band that I'm in now that your mother doesn't really like.
Oh, did she ever though?
No. So Poe is still in the band.
And that's the Cyrus Kane Band.
No.
You changed the name?
Oh yeah, the Cyrus Kane so Cyrus Kane was the band I was in before you were born.
Okay.
And when we found out that Mama was pregnant with you, I decided that's it. I can't do the music thing anymore, because it's just not. And I was going through this whole change in life at that point anyway. So I stopped. And I didn't play for, 20 years, I guess. Nothing. I didn't even play my guitar at home. After you had left, I think Eli was still at home. And I started getting back into music just a little bit. And then I met these guys. No, the name of this band, this current band, is the Indiana Mudbugs.
Oh, okay, way cooler.
So
Never mind.
Way cooler than Cyrus Kane.
But you guys seem to be doing pretty well. Mama said you were like very busy throughout the summer and stuff.
We're just constantly booked.
You have people listening to you now, which is probably an improvement from your first band back in the day.
Yeah, it's better than the parlor.
What was your first job? The first thing you did that earned you some money?
It might have been detasseling corn.
Me too.
But your grandpa was a machinist, and we had a machine shop at home, and I worked in that machine shop, and he had this saw that would cut steel, and I would cut these parts with this saw, and I made like a penny a part, or maybe 2 cents a part, or whatever. And then I would start running some of the bigger machines, and it was always, I don't think I ever got paid by the hour. It was always by part. So it increased a little bit over time, but that was it. But we fought like cats and dogs. We did not get along at all, so it didn't last very long.
Yeah.
But that was the first job.
After all that, you graduated high school and everything, and at some point in there, you ended up getting into horses. How did that all happen?
So there was this girl, and her name was Ani Berry. Ani, strange name, but her parents were really into jumping horses, so tricaners and warm blood horses. And of course I liked Ani, so I thought that, that would be a way to get her to like me or whatever. But in the process of that whole thing, I developed this like crazy love of horses, just the beauty of it all and all that kind of thing. That's how I got into them. And then Ani, she went by the wayside. So then I met your mother, and it started with these jumpers, and then quickly went into thoroughbred racing, because that's something you could actually make a living doing. And it played its way all the way out until at the very end, like you remember, I had the draft ponies, and farmed with them and all that stuff. So
what was it like working with them, particularly like in Kentucky? And What were some of your favorite parts of working with these horses?
I think part of what drew me to the horses was that I was able to really excel at it. And I found out really quickly that, and this sounds awful, but I found out really quickly that you don't have to try very hard to be noticeably better than most of the other people around you. And that's true I found that in every profession now. But at that time it was horses, and that was the first time I really found that. So all of a sudden it was like I was recognized as being, the best groom in the barn or whatever. So I was really attracted to that. Also, just the whole, horses are beautiful, so...
Yeah.
So that really attracted me. And there's a certain amount of, with racehorses, there's a real attention to detail.
And
that's me.
Yeah.
So the harder you work on a horse, the more shiny their coat is. So my horses they really looked good.
In the process of working with these horses, you already mentioned that you met Mama.
Mm-hmm.
What was that like? Tell me about it because I know what she always says, but I want to know about it from your side.
So you've heard the phrase opposites attract, right?
Mm-hmm.
Well, there could be no more. At that time, I was like, I had hair to like here, and I smoked like a freight train, and foul-mouthed. I was just white trash, basically. And Mama, she came from this upper middle class family, and she hates when I say this, North Dakota. She'll always say, it's Minnesota. Whatever. It's North Dakota, all right? And, there weren't many girls at this school. And the ones that were there, frankly, were nut jobs.
Yeah.
But as soon as I saw your Mama, it was like, boom. I knew right there I was going to marry her. And it worked out that way. So from the moment we met, it was Annie and David. Mm-hmm. There was no, that was just the way it was, yeah.
Yeah.
So, we were basically married, in our minds, we were married 3 weeks after we met. Mm-hmm. And now here it is 35 years later.
When did you first decide that you wanted kids? How did that transpire?
So the mantra goes, we didn't like kids, we didn't like other people's kids. There were going to be no kids. It was just us. So we were running a horse farm for this guy, Oz Pazanka. And I don't know, it was one... Now, see, this is the weird thing. It's like, for most people, you get married and then kids come along, Mm-hmm. It wasn't like that with us. With us, it was decision. Okay, we're going to have kids. Like, we're going to go to France or something. And I remember it was a Christmas Eve, and we were getting ready to go to Grandma's house, like every year. And I just had this overwhelming feeling of pointlessness. What the heck is this all for? Mm-hmm. And I think I was even like at the point of tears or something. But Mama came in and, what's up? And I told her all this stuff. And your mother, she was scared. When I say scared of having kids, there's no word in the English language to really articulate the level of panic that would come into her eyes when we talked about having kids. Because all her life growing up, she was just told how, it was hell, basically. Having them was hell. When they grow up, it's hell. When they're little, it's just hell. Mm-hmm. So the fact that she said, okay, we'll do this, that speaks volumes for your mother. Because she was so petrified of it. But, I pushed that, and so we had one, and then we had two, and then we had three, and then four, and five, and had one that died, and all that. And it's been the hardest thing in my life, but it's also what's gave my life meaning. Everything else I've done really has been, once we had kids, everything I did was through the filter of my kids. Well, what's this mean for the kids, or what can I do for the kids? And all the crazy crap that I've done in my life, it was always for the family, for the kids, because I thought I could make things better or whatever. Now that comes with a whole lot of stress for everybody else involved in it.
But it came from a good place.
Yeah.
And I think I certainly have always recognized that, and I would hope that everybody else did too. I hope. As I've gotten older, it's become harder to deal with what I see as the results of all that in you guys. Because now I see you guys struggling with who you are based on how you were raised, and it's like, well, crap.
and I did that. That's hard. It really is. And every once in a while, I'll hear something from you or from Eli or from Aaron or whatever about how, because of how we were raised, well, in a negative way, and you don't mean it this way, but when I hear that, it's a knife, because it's like, that's all me. The things that your mother did, and she'll get mad at me for saying this, but I think that was all because of her trying to do where I was leading us. Whenever that was, the skirt thing, that was all me. The simple living thing, that was all me. Everything, working in the garden, that was all me. Now, I'm not saying she didn't see the value in that. And hard work is good, so the strict discipline, all that junk, that was all me trying to do what I thought was right. But in the meantime, but while you're doing that, this is the thing about, being a parent. You're still basically a 15-year-old kid inside, right?
Yeah.
So while you're doing all that stuff, you're trying to figure it all out. And you're adjusting and adapting and dealing with all your faults and failures and idiosyncrasies, and it's such a stinking mess.
And do you think that, and this is something that I've always wondered about, and it's something that people ask me about too when it comes to like the whole homeschooling thing and everything like that, and like the way that you chose to raise us, do you think that that was because of you trying to counterbalance the way that you were raised and the way that you saw how your life had progressed because of the way your parents raised you and everything?
Yeah, because I know the effects of firsthand of not having any direction, of not having any boundaries, of not having any expectations, nothing. It's like I was just like bouncing around trying to figure out this thing called life. And I wanted to give you guys, I guess, a safe place that I never had. I didn't have anything. And that's why I'm so really sensitive to, like, if I feel like, I had this with Aaron a lot. I felt like Aaron kind of struggled with the whole social fitting in thing, and it destroyed me because I could see me in him. And now with Andrew, he has friends now, and that's cool. But still, every time he goes into a new situation, I'm like panicked. Because I'm afraid he's going to be rejected, or... And
you see that aspect of yourself that you're reliving. I mean, I can't speak for everybody else, but I know for myself, when I first left home, I was ready to get away. Like, I just wanted to go away. I didn't want to have any part of anything anymore. And I think a certain part of that is normal anyway. As I've grown a little bit and been out of the house for a little while, I see myself returning to a lot of the things that we had growing up, and it's really interesting to see. I mean, they always say that you're doomed to become your parents. Like, that's such a terrible thing, and sometimes it can be, but I think there's aspects of the way that you raised us and who you are that is impacting my life in a really positive way. The good stuff, I think you get to a point where you are able to filter through, and if you had a good foundation anyway, which I think we all did, you're able to filter through the nonsense, the bullshit of everything else, and take the good stuff. Yeah. So, and I know for myself, I've started to do that, and I can kind of see it a little bit in Eli, just in the way that he acts when we're together, and he used to not be able to hold on to $1, and now he's like very frugal, and like he's getting more and more disciplined with things. And I just think you're not done growing up. Like when I left home, I wasn't a grown up yet, and I grew up a little bit more in Gitmo, and I'm still growing up, and I'm still taking those things that you kind of threw at us when we were little, and I'm picking through that and taking what I need with me. And I think you do that throughout your entire life. I'm not going to embrace every single thing that you and Mama did, because I'm not you guys. And it would be weird, honestly, if I did, because you don't want a clone of yourself. That's weird. But I'm still taking a lot of the good stuff, and I'm weighing a lot of those heavy questions that I'm sure you and Mama weighed. It's probably hard for you to see that because you're far away and you don't interact with me every single day, but I can tell you for myself that I do have that, and I think that everybody else does too. And it's going to take time to see it evolve. When
you first left home, so it started earlier with you, and I think it's because you're a girl, so you matured faster. But there was a long time there where I thought, man, Becca's the only one with any sense. The rest of them are all just. But now it's weird, because what I'm seeing is, as Eli and Aaron are maturing, it's like, wow. And I always knew Aaron would be responsible, and he'd be like,
fine.
Oh yeah, just because he's a worker, always has been. Eli I didn't know about. I was scared to death that he was gonna, end up living under a bridge or whatever. But I gotta tell you, watching him over the past year, and really on this trip, man, he's got it together. He's still Eli
Mm-hmm.
because he's Eli. But I mean, there's part like this whole thing with money. It's comical to watch.
Isn't it?
Because like we were at that mall last night, you know, he's looking at these shirts and stuff, and he's like, "You gotta be kidding me! There's no way I'm paying that." And in the past, you know, if he had $1, it was gone.
Yep.
So I'm just all of my kids. Maria's getting. I'm seeing it in her more and more. I'm really happy with that. It's sad too, because as you guys grow, you don't need us anymore. You're your own people. So as you become your own people, your mother and I struggle with, okay, well, who are we then? Because, you know, for the past 25 years or whatever, the we has been us. Well, when you take 90% of the us out, there's very little we left. And now, so we have to refine that, rediscover that. And it's a challenge because we're looking for those 20-year-olds. Those 20-year-olds aren't here anymore. So we got to find these 50-some-year-olds.
I just think, and I've thought this for a long time, that you reach a certain point in your life, and it could be when something traumatic or something impactful happens, but it's usually at some point in your adolescence. And you hit that point, and your body and everything ages, and you gain experiences, and you mature, but you never grow past. You are always that person inside. And I think that that's a big part of it. Like, we all have that little child inside that's like very afraid of everything, and that's why I think a lot of the time it's really challenging, especially when you're responsible for another human being, to let go of control, because you're afraid to let go of anything within yourself as well.
Yeah.
And I can already see it in myself and the things that I do. I recognize that, and I can't imagine, obviously, because I don't have kids, what that would be like. But
well, if I let you guys go, I have to find myself, right? Well, I don't know who myself is, because I was struggling with that when I was 20, so we had kids. Well, I got to go back and deal with that again, and you know, I've already had my midlife crisis. It was those cows. So now what do? I'd look silly with a gold chain and a Corvette. So I don't know.
What has been the most rewarding aspect of your life so far?
No, my kids.
Yeah.
By far. Everything else is meaningless, really.
What has been one of the most challenging things that you've had to overcome? And this could be something personal for you, something with the family, however you want to interpret it.
Well, the biggest thing was your grandpa, he drank like a fish. And your aunts and uncles, they always knew that Dad drank because, you know, he drank beer. He wasn't a vodka drunk. He drank beer. And he always had beer. You know, when he would cut the grass, he'd drink a beer. And when he was, you know, and when people came over, there was always these tall Stroh's beer bottles everywhere. That was just, but something happened when I got to be at a very critical time. I was entering my teenage years, right when his casual drinking became something that started to control him. It got to the point where it went from Stroh's beer to like crazy cheap beer to crazy cheap beer that he didn't even put in the refrigerator anymore. It got to where it just controlled his life. And it was a very humiliating thing for me, because we had this big house and everybody in town thought that we were rich, which we weren't at all. We had nothing. And I can remember I saw Mom and Dad's tax return one year when Dad was doing it, and their adjusted, this would have been like in 1980, 81, their adjusted gross income was $6,500, not thousand, $6,500. I mean, we had nothing. But you know, Dad always kept it going because he was a machinist. That industry is terribly cyclical, and during the 80s it hit rock bottom. Everything did, but he just couldn't make any money. Plus he supported your great grandparents who were, Grandpa he drank too. He was a whiskey drunk. I never saw my grandpa, that I can remember, I never saw him sober. He was a functional drunk, you know.
Yeah.
But he never could really hold it. I mean, he dug graves for a living and sold night crawlers and all this kind of thing, built dog houses.
Yeah.
And so Dad had all that pressure on him. Plus, he was the one who could fix everything. He was the one who made all the money. He was the, everything. So everybody depended on him. And that got to be, I couldn't deal with it. The humiliation of people watching my dad go deeper and deeper into this abyss. I mean, it got to the point where he couldn't even function, he was just a mess. And it was humiliating. And that's right when I was entering my teenage years. So that started to eat me really badly. And it got to the point where I couldn't even function anymore. I mean, I had panic attacks and all this crazy crap. That was a really, really, really hard time that I still deal with today. I've dealt with it all my life, and I always will deal with it. That adult child of an alcoholic thing, it's a very real thing, and it colors my whole life. And all these things that all the ways that I've hurt your mother over the years by making maybe poor decisions or getting her into things that she didn't want to be into or whatever. It's all this, this adult child of alcoholic thing where you're trying to save the dignity of the family, and you keep doing that. Those tapes just play. You can't stop them. So that's by far the hardest thing I've dealt with in my life. The second hardest thing was just a year or so ago when I left EQS. I knew I had to leave because I was going to have a heart attack, and I took a job that paid less than half what I made there, much less than half, and our finances tanked big time. And you older kids were witness this, and
It's
a nice word.
We can take a second if you want.
Eli's wedding, the fact that either him or Abby's parents, somebody paid for us to come up here for this wedding, that I cannot begin to tell you the level of humiliation I felt over that. And probably always will, because I know it hurt Eli. Eli didn't understand, I don't think. He thought maybe I just didn't want to spend the money or something. But Aaron had just had this illness, and he was only starting to be able to walk again. And we didn't have any money. I was having to borrow money from Aaron to pay the mortgage, and oh gosh, it was just awful. Your mother's going to hate that I said this, and this is going to, people will see this, but so what? It is what it is.
Their struggles.
It was hard. So those are the two hard things in my life. And Mama too. I mean, this was so hard on her, because all she ever wanted was a decent house. We finally had one, and then we had to sell it because I couldn't afford it on what I was making. And the crazy thing about the whole thing is, we sold the house, and the day we closed on this stupid thing, I got this massive raise at work, and all of a sudden BME was, oh gee, we haven't paid you nearly enough. So now we wouldn't have had to have sold it, but...
Well, I think you need to get out of there anyway. I mean, that's just my humble opinion. But I was always so aware of what the money situation was growing up, where it was going, where it was coming from, who needed what. And it wasn't because, and it was never a thing of my dad's doing a terrible job and can't support the family. It wasn't like that. It was just, I had a very, I think, real understanding of the entire situation, because it was just this is our life. We have a huge family, and money does not grow on trees. And I would see you trying your hardest to do everything that you needed to do for the family, and it was never, and I never felt like you were messing up. I never felt like you were doing a bad job, and I still don't feel that way. I feel so much affection and respect and appreciation for everything that you've always done to try to make everything work. And because I know it's not easy, because it's not easy when it's one person with bills to pay. I can't imagine with a whole family. And it has always broken my heart to see you guys struggle, especially being an adult and living on the outside and seeing the family and everything, because I want to step in and fix it. But I can't, because it's not my job. You can't walk for somebody.
The thing is, Becca, we always, maybe, I don't know, maybe it's not true, but in my mind anyway, I felt like we always had just a little bit more than we needed to get by. And that little bit more, that's where the challenge comes in, because I would use that little bit more to try to get a little bit more. When I probably should have just left a little bit more alone, and that would have been the buffer. So your mother has always had to struggle to provide this nice home that she always has, with, and get you guys clothes and all this kind of stuff, with so very little to work with, you know, because all that little bit extra I had spent on a tractor, or on goats, or on, you know, a better car, or whatever. There was always something in my mind that was a necessity, and I guess I didn't view shoes and socks as so much of a necessity, maybe.
Yeah.
So,
well,
it's
I
been
never
tough.
felt growing up that we lacked for anything. Like, there's wants and needs are two very different things, and I never felt like there was anything that we needed that we didn't have.
Well, that's part's good, because I can tell you, when I was growing up, it was definitely, you know what though, this is weird, because I would have said the exact same thing you just said. I mean, we were living on government cheese and rice and stuff when I was growing up, literally, and we'd have to go get it at night because the neighbors couldn't see us getting this stuff, bringing this stuff home. It would have humiliated the family. But even then, I never really felt like, I felt like there was a lot of stuff I wanted that I couldn't have, but I never really felt like there was anything I needed that I didn't have. And maybe it's the same for you guys, and maybe it's the same for families who make, you know, $500,000 a year. I don't know.
I don't know. I just think that I appreciate things. I appreciate meaningful things more than physical things. I would be much happier living in a tiny little shack and having a really meaningful relationship with my family than having a bunch of stuff. I mean, having a nice vehicle to drive, you need something reliable so you can get to your job. But past all of that, it's all just so much whatever. It just doesn't mean that much to me. And I think I would just, if I could impress anything upon you, it would just be that, at least for me, and I think for everybody else, if you really put their feet to the fire and got them to admit it, we never felt like we lacked for anything, and we never felt like we didn't have a good home or anything like that. We always knew that we had a good, stable family and a roof over our head, and that's really the most important thing, because you can have the entire world falling down around you, and as long as you have that foundation, you'll be okay.
Well, that's really your mother that provided all that.
No, but I mean, she couldn't have done it by herself, and
Oh,
we
I
always
know,
knew
but-
that you were the like strong, reliable presence that was going to figure everything out, and that's a lot of pressure for you. But you always managed to make it work, and it was all okay.
My point in that is, though, as I'm over there trying to figure this out and make it all work, Mama was the one who had to, like, you know, keep the dishes washed and make sure you guys got to the doctor and whatever else, you know, deal with the fact that her back was broken and she still had to pack Andy around. And that's something I want to really stress to you guys. I've thought about writing you guys the letters and stuff, but I'm too stinking lazy. But the part of this whole equation that I don't think gets enough recognition is your mother. She's, you know, you did this interview with her. She won't talk about the stuff I do because Mama's got a lot of pride and she doesn't air dirty laundry or whatever. But I'm telling you, coming from the stuff I talk about, my growing up,
Oh, I know.
it's nothing.
I know.
And the fact that she's done what she has done, in spite of, you know, me wanting us to be Amish and all kind of crazy stuff, it's really phenomenal.
Well, you guys are a team, and you
Yeah.
couldn't do it without her, and she couldn't do it without you. And I recognize both of your talents, and that's why I wanted to do all of this anyway, to highlight, because I could have sat both of you down together, and maybe I'll do that at some point. That would be cute. But I wanted to get both of you separate, to highlight both of your separate stories and what you both bring to the table, and what you both brought together for all of us.
Well, I can tell you, beyond anything else I know in my life, I can tell you that your mother saved my life. And I would not be alive if it weren't for her. Literally, I'd be dead. I would have self-destructed because I was going that way, you know. And Mama I think she brought beauty into my life that didn't exist before. And I don't mean physical beauty. She brought that too. I mean just like the beauty of life. That's what Mama brings to the equation.
Given everything, where you come from, and the past that you've created, and everything that you've given us for yourself, because the past 20 plus years of your life now have been devoted to family and to creating this life for all of us. And you mentioned this a little bit, so maybe I'm like forcing an answer out of you that you don't have. But where would you like to see yourself in 10 years? What are some like personal goals? It doesn't have to be anything grandiose, but where would you like to start working towards? Because you're not dead. You still got plenty of life left in you. So what would you like to do?
You know, it's so crazy to hear you say that, because inside I still feel like I'm 20 years old. And there's times when it's like, you know, being 50, it sucks. There's times when, you know, like Andy wants to run or whatever, and I'm still trying to, you know, act like I'm 30. But it's like we'll run and I'll think, oh my God. I didn't even know I had a bone there. That's the problem. This is something I've struggled with, and I'm struggling with it right now. You're asking me, you know, where do you see yourself in 10 years? For the first time in my adult life, I don't have an answer.
Yeah.
I have no freaking idea, because so much of what, you know, I tell Mama this all the time. It's like I always had in my life, I always had this goal I was working toward. You know, I've got to get there. Well, I feel like I've used them up. And I'm not saying I reached all these goals. A lot of them on the way I realized this is complete bullshit. You know, so I jettisoned that one. But I'm to the point now where it's like I feel like I need that next quest. You know, it was sailing, it was farming, it was horses, it was whatever. I can tell you my job is nowhere in that mix.
No, I know.
I mean, if I could figure out a way to support us and not, Mama thinks I get all this like satisfaction and she thinks I get all my needs met with the admiration and whatever I get at work. It's not true at all. All I get from work is stress. You know, I feel like look, it's work calling. What I get from work is stress, and you know, it's just for me, work is a big avenue for my imposter syndrome that I deal with. So work's nowhere in there. But you know, what do I want to do? Where do I see myself? I don't know. I mean, a lot of people my age would say, "Oh, I want to get an RV and travel." Well, I've done that.
Yeah.
So now I've got this stupid RV that I've got to take care of. Oh, I want to retire and just go off and live in the woods. Well, I've done that. I want to play music. I've done that. I don't know. I don't know where I see myself. And that's kind of scary, really, for me, because if I don't have something that I'm like, you know, if I'm not on a quest, it starts to get kind of pointless. And I don't want to go there. So right now I've got Andrew and Maria, which I feel like I'm doing a lousy job with. That I feel like this is weird. It's like there was you, Aaron and Eli, and now there's Maria and Andrew. And my parenting is completely different. And I don't necessarily see that as a good thing. I feel like I'm selling them short, especially with both of them. I mean, I feel like I don't give Maria enough attention, and I feel like I don't know what to do with Andrew, and I'm afraid that he's going to resent that, and it's just, I don't know what to do with that. I'm really struggling with that part, but I don't know where I see myself.
I think that's okay. I think, especially in Western civilization, we place a lot of emphasis on having a goal and like crushing it, you know.
Mm-hmm.
It was all supposed to be about, you know, setting these goals and having this whatever so that you can fit in wherever. And I think there's not enough of value put on just existing and going day to day and seeing where the road takes you. And that's kind of been something that in the short amount of time between when I left home and now I've already dealt with, because I've changed goals several times, and where I am now is not where I thought I would be, and I'm not doing what I thought I would be doing, and that's totally okay. And I recognize the fact that what I'm doing now is probably not what I'm going to be doing 10 years from now. The career path that I'm setting myself on is probably going to be completely different, and I think that that's completely fine, because nothing is ever set in stone. Everything is constantly in flux. The only thing that's permanent is change.
Mm-hmm.
And so to expect anyone to have a perfect plan, to be like, this is what I'm doing and I'm not changing it, and then this is my goal, and you know, when I get here I'm going to be content, I'm going to be happy. Well, that's ridiculous, because even if you look in nature, nothing ever stays the same. It's constantly, even a stone changes with the season.
Well, here's the thing. This is what's the challenge is. When you're a parent, and when you put so much of yourself into being a parent, when that's gone, you cease to exist for a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to reestablish yourself as this new person. And that's what's happened to me, or what's happening to me.
You're going through an ego death.
Oh yeah, I mean, so you guys, I know that you and Eli, I know that to you the Navy is just this huge cross you have to bear right now to get to your next point. Whatever. I get that. I personally think that there will come a time in your life when both of you will say, man, I should have stayed in the Navy.
Maybe.
But
probably.
whatever.
The grass is always greener.
But that all aside, I look at you guys and I think, wow, I've always had this thing, and maybe other people have it, I don't know, maybe this is like a weakness of mine, but I've always felt this need to be a part of something bigger than myself. Now, for Mama, that's being a mother, a wife and a mother, and that's being a faithful daughter of God, and that's true for me too. But for a man, I think it's different. There's more there. We have that part, but we also, you know, it's not all encompassing. Maybe it is for some, but anyway, I look at you guys and what you're doing, and I have such admiration for that, and frankly, awe. I mean, you guys are in this stuff every day. You put on this uniform every day, and it's like, I gotta wear this stupid uniform. But I grew up in a time when my friends' parents had been bomber pilots in World War II. So it's different for me. There's a sense of awe and reverence. I mean, even these two schleps, the two guys, that's awful. You gotta cut that. So cut back in. Even these two guys who were on the, so they were pulling shore duty on the Nautilus yesterday when we went in there. And even those two guys, it's like I felt this, it's like I was walking up to a priest or something almost, because they're in that uniform. And they're a part of something that's huge. Your generation doesn't get that so much, and I understand. I wouldn't either if it was my generation. Had I gone into the Marine Corps like I was intending to, I'm sure I would have been as jaded and negative, even more so, because of the Marines, for heaven's sake. But, so I look at you guys, and it's like, wow, it's like, oh, they got this thing going on. And then I look at myself, and I'm like, okay, what am I doing? So that's a struggle I have to get over, and your mother tries to help me a lot with that, but there's always so much she can do, you know. I know Mama's on the right path. I've just got to get there, and in order to get there, I've got to deal with all these demons, you know.
Everybody has something, and when you're on the other side of the fence looking at what somebody else is doing, you know, I get how what I'm doing and what Eli's doing seems just like the coolest, and I know it does. And like when I tell people, I drive a patrol boat on a river, they're like, oh wow, you know, they think it's like really high speed. To me, it's just peanut butter and jelly, because I do it every single day, and I understand my own, like, because it's just how it is. The novelty of something wears off. You have to find meaning within what you're doing, and I found a way to exist in within where I am right now in life, and to find the things that give me joy, even if it's not my job necessarily.
Yeah.
And that's how it is for everybody. It doesn't matter who you could be, the most high-speed tactical guy out there, and to him it's just another day in the office. You know?
I get that.
So, I mean, and I get where you're coming from. And I'm very careful not to rag on the military too hard, because I recognize that it gave me something that I was not able to give myself. It set me up with a job and a roof over my head and a paycheck and like all that stuff that I needed. And obviously I met Stuart, and I've made these connections and these friendships that I would not have made if I hadn't made the decision to join the military. And I recognize the fact that it's given me a pathway to what I want to do next. And I don't know how long I'm going to stick around, you know, being in the reserves and stuff, how long that's going to last, where the road's going to take me. I'm not too worried about it, because I recognize that at least for right now, I've gained something valuable that I wouldn't have otherwise gotten.
You know, just from a nuts and bolts standpoint, and I promise I'll shut up after this, just from a nuts and bolts standpoint, that house that Eli's living in and that car he's driving right now,
Oh, I know.
the Navy bought that for him. There is no way that I could have imagined having anything that nice when I was his age, because there's just no way I could have afforded it.
I know.
Right? I mean, a high school graduate out here working in a factory, and at the time I was making what would be thought of as pretty doggone good money working in a factory, but there's no way I could have had a car like that or a house like that. And the same thing holds true today, by the way, people on the outs, people in civilian life, young people starting out.
Oh, I know.
I know the military is, I know all the idiosyncrasies of it, because you guys have all told me, and I've been involved with people in the military through things I've done. So I know all the negative aspects of it. I think when you're on the inside of that, you look at civilian life and you think, you can have all that stuff but not have to deal with any of this BS.
No.
Well, guess what? When you're on the outside, you could say, I could have all that stuff and not have to deal with any of this BS. So it's the same. But anyway, I'll get off my soapbox.
Well, we'll just close with this, because this is something that I've talked about with friends who have separated already. And it's like, you have one set of issues being in the military, whatever grievances. They don't go away. You just trade them for a different set when you get out. And it's like, which set do you feel like dealing with?
Yep.
You know? And that's just, you have to make that decision. And for everybody, it's a little bit different.
It is.
And that's just the way it is. But to say that there's not benefits, and to say that, you know, it's not something that someone should seriously consider, I would never tell someone, oh, you shouldn't join the military. I would never say that, because that would be such a crazy thing to say. You know, it is what it is, and you just...
It comes at a price.
It comes at a price, but you take the good, and you get what you can out of it, and when the time comes to go, you go, because it's at an end. The chapter is ended, and it's time to start a new one. And that's just life. So, to close out, and I think this is a good way to close, given everything that we've talked about. What advice or wisdom or thoughts would you pass on to any of us, or any younger people who might be watching this video?
So we've already talked about this before, so you know, it's on you to do this. So on my tombstone, you know, it's going to say, never embrace mediocrity. Mm-hmm. That's number one. And be careful, because it's so easy to say that, and it's so hard to live it, because mediocrity is everywhere. It's what we are, as human beings, we're automatically pulled to that. You know, you're pulled to the comfortable, the easy, the safe, the whatever. But that's not where greatness comes from. Greatness comes from forcing yourself to get outside of that, and you'll find greatness on the other side. I realize in saying that I'm a hypocrite. I get it, but I'm honest enough, I think, to say it's still true. Even though I haven't been able to get there, it's still true. You've got to resist mediocrity with everything in your fiber, because it'll suck you in, and you'll wake up someday and realize that I have not done squat with my life, with this life that God gave me. I haven't lived up to it. I believe that God puts that in us. He's always pulling us toward His design for us, and that's that feeling that we have and we're going to have it until we accept it, until we give in and go where God wants us to go and do what God wants us to do. So that's the first thing. Never embrace mediocrity. Force yourself to step out of your comfort zone, whatever that comfort zone may be. It might be something simple like, leaving your parents' house and getting a job. It might be joining the Navy. It might be, a friend of ours who, even though he doesn't have to, still gets in helicopters in Afghanistan and goes and does crazy crap. But whatever that is, you've got to do it. The second thing is, I believe that you have to live your faith. Whatever that faith is, you got to find what that is for you. I know what it is for me. I know what it is for Mama. But whatever your faith is, you got to live it. Because without that, you're nothing. Human beings without faith, for me that's faith in Jesus Christ. Human beings without faith are animals, and they will continue to devolve until they're lower than animals. So you got to find faith, and you've got to hang on to it. You've got to hold fast to the tenets of that faith. And I believe that faith requires action, and that means something that's very hard for us to do, which is giving in to the authority of that faith, whatever that authority might be. For us, it's the magisterium, it's the Holy Roman Catholic Church. So there's things the church teaches that maybe I don't agree with, but you know what? It's my faith. So that's what I live, and I think that's very important. And your mother, I believe, is way, way beyond me when it comes to this. I think Mama has always thought that, and she would never admit this, and she'll deny it, but I do believe that she's always thought that maybe I didn't really, like, if it wasn't for her, I wouldn't go to church or anything. I don't think that's true. I've always had faith. When I was sitting at that piano, I talked about when we first started out, that song I was singing, it was to God. My earliest memories were of church, not the Catholic Church, but I've always had that. And there's times when that's what's saved me, literally. So those are my two things. Never embrace mediocrity, and find your faith and submit yourself totally to it. Whether you're a Jew, a Hindu, a Christian, whatever, and whatever your brand of those things are, I think that's really important.
And I think that wraps everything up. Do you have any final little things you want to get off your chest before we close up?
Well, I want my kids to know that everything I've done in my life that's been of any real value has been for and because of my wife and my kids. Because I've not done anything in my life of any real value that wasn't run through that filter. And I think that's why I'm struggling so much now, because that filter is becoming, the holes in that filter are becoming bigger and bigger and bigger. So it's getting harder for me to run my life through it. You guys have your own filters now. Aaron's grown into be his own man. Eli's married, has his own family. You're developing your own family. And Maria's about to leave. She's not going to need me anymore, and Andy's not far behind. So once that's all gone, I don't know. But I can tell you that it's been a wild ride, and I guess if my life ended tomorrow, I'd be okay.
There's a country song that I really like, and the refrain goes, "Family is family, in church or in prison. You get what you get, and you don't get to pick 'em." And I just think that it's funny, but it's true, and it's just, you say like, oh, you're not going to need me anymore. And I talked about this with Mama not too long ago too, and it's just, your family is always going to need you. We're always going to need each other. It's just the ways in which we don't need you to change our diapers anymore. We need you for other kinds of support, and that never changes.
My fear, I don't want to be irrelevant. I don't want to be, oh, it's Papa. Just let him go, he's okay. I don't want to be that guy, and that's my fear. I don't want to become irrelevant, and I don't want to embrace that mediocrity. And as I've gotten older, it's like, wow, it's gotten harder to do because I'm running out of quests,
I'm always going to love you, always going to want you in my life. And I think, at a certain point, it's up to you how much you have to make the decision to insert yourself into your family members' lives. You have to make the decision to be an active participant in your own life and in the lives of the people around you. It's something that I think about all the time. It comes back to, whether or not you're going to sit by and let life pass you by and wake up one day, or you're going to step into that moment and into the lives of the people that are around you. And I feel, and I know you don't feel that way, but it's hard. I think maybe it's harder for you to see it, but I feel that you have, at least up until this point, done that in all of our lives. And how you choose to do that going forward is up to you. But I think that you're doing pretty well, and if I can just, hats off to you for that. And I mean, you're my dad, so you're my example. That is the final thought that I want to leave. Hugs. I love you.
Yeah, I love you.
Thank you so much for doing this with me. I really, really appreciate it. It's going to be on YouTube forever.
Oh, yeah, and Mama's going to kill me.
So,
I'll deal with that later, I guess.
So if you have family, and I say this every single time, you should really seriously consider doing something like this with them. Particularly if you have, especially like any family member, but especially if you have like grandparents or something, you can sit down, because that's part of your history that you will otherwise lose if you don't find a way, write it down, record it, do something to hang on to it, because you might not care about it now, but you will later on in life. And it does matter. So thank you for watching this. If you've made it through this far, let me know what your thoughts were. If you decide to do something like this with your own family, I'd love to hear about that as well. And hang on to your family members and love them, because they're your family, and you don't get to pick them, but they are yours. And it's the one thing in life that's never going to change, no matter how much you might want it to. So thank you, and I'll see you next time.
Family is family in church.